was driving a bus in the deserts of Central Australia, over 500 kilometers from the nearest town. So, yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. I was on a 5-day charter to pick up a group of Aboriginal elder women for their women's business health checks. On the day of their appointments, we went via a place called Mentabee, allowing them to shop in the clothing store in this little local mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3-hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day, I took them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep, even the nurse who was traveling with us. So, there I was, all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, with my 30 passengers sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab. It was around 9 p.m. when, up ahead in the distance, I saw a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road. I dipped my lights, and as I drove down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed, expecting to see the car with only one headlight anytime shortly, it was nothing unusual to see a car with only one headlight out there, so I wasn't remotely bothered. As I came out of the dip, I put my spotlights and high beams back on, but there was no car, just the empty dirt road. No dust in the air, and I could see a good distance in front of me and out to each side. There was nothing there, just the empty desert, the dirt road, and me alone in the cab. I kept the lights on until we came to a stop about an hour later, but I didn't see any cars or anything else for the rest of the journey. Before letting the passengers out, I asked if any of them saw the light, and they all fell silent. After a short while, they started talking in their language hurriedly, and then they all got off the bus. A few minutes later, a couple of the ladies approached me, asking me to describe exactly what I saw and where I saw it. Now, I'm a big guy, lived on 3 continents, been a police officer, teacher, bus and coach driver, and truck driver. Let's just say I'm pretty skeptical, but I do have an open mind. I'm not scared by much in this world. After I told these ladies everything, from start to finish, and described in detail exactly where it happened, the 2 ladies looked at me with whites showing in their eyes. They looked spooked, and I'll never forget the way they said it. They said, "Driver, we are so lucky that you did not stop, because if you did, no one would have seen any of us ever again. We'd all be gone." I asked why, but they just shook their heads and said not to talk about it because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Min Mine lights in Western Queensland. Well, whatever these ladies knew about what I saw in our location, they were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in the desert at night. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies from this area, whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years, are worried to the point of all being scared, I certainly don't want to mess with whatever it is. Around 2006-ish, I was driving flatbed trucks in rural Tennessee. My memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. I found a wide shoulder, pulled over to fix it, and realized I had done a lousy job tarping the load. I decided to redo it on the side of the road. I undid all the bungee straps, dragged the tops off, rolled them back up, climbed up on the load, and started unrolling the tarps again. I saw a guy walking down the same side of the road towards my truck. I didn't think much about it, other than to keep an eye on him because I was in the middle of nowhere. I continued what I was doing, and by the time I had the tarps set in place and was climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this guy was getting close. I started paying more attention to him than to tarping my load. I grabbed my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I was working, just in case. It was an 8-pound solid metal bar, about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one end and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains. The guy reached me, and the first thing I noticed was his hair. It was like a mullet but patchy. Then, his eyes were off, not drunk or high, but something seemed peculiar. His clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes. I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe, and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stopped by me, waited until I acknowledged him, and just said, "I've got a long walk." I replied, "Your man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere, making it clear there's no ride to be had here." He nodded, started walking by me, and continued on his way. He stopped about the driver's door on my truck, turned around, came back to me, and repeated himself, "I've got a long walk." At this point, I explained that I couldn't give him a ride due to insurance and all that, apologized for not being able to help him out, and he seemed to accept this. He turned around and left. I waited for him to get a little ways away from my truck and started working on finishing the tarp job.
I still kept an eye on him, and he was moving away from me.
As I put on the last of the bungee straps, I looked over to check where he was, and I saw that he'd turned around, heading back towards me, about 100 yards in front of my truck, and coming back my way. It looked like he was talking on a cell phone, hand up to his face, and I could barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he was having a conversation with someone. I finished with the straps, grabbed my winch bar, and climbed into my truck. As he's about 10 yards away now, as soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat, just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone, he's talking to his hand. Now I'm nervous, because he doesn't look like he's having a nice, pleasant chat. I crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out without looking for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with this weird look on his face, just staring at me. It gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I looked in the mirror, and there was no one there. It was a late night on the New York State Thruway. I was flying along down a very long, slightly sloped downhill stretch that went on for just miles and miles. Just as the road started to rise, my headlights caught a huge buck deer with giant antlers standing full across the right-hand lane, the lane I was in. Because I had low beams on, I hadn't seen him until I was almost at the rise, right on top of him. I had a moment of almost peace, as I had been terrified for quite a while that I would have a high-speed collision with a deer. I had limited driving experience, having grown up in the city and just gotten my first driver's license a couple of years before. The possibility of a deer hit at some point was likely, as everyone I had met upstate had experienced it at one time or another. I like to travel as a lone car on the thruway. I hate how cars get into packs. I knew that there were several trucks and 3 or 4 cars grouped a few miles behind me, but no one was near. I don't know if that affected my judgment or what happened. Suddenly, there appeared what looked like 2 very faint translucent screens with pictograms and white chalk on them, like cave paintings. One was in front of the windshield, and I'm aware the other was to my left. I can't see it, but it feels like it's attached to my left elbow somehow. Before I could even think, what in the friggin' hell is this nonsense? The screen to my left suddenly yanked my elbow violently, which made me yank the wheel violently to the left. Then the screen pushed my elbow and, consequently, the wheel just as violently to the right. At about 85 miles per hour, I didn't think I even had time to brake. My car was going sideways in very slow motion. I had a moment where I saw what looked like a dawning of fear in the deer's eyes closest to me. Then, things sped up. I was past the deer, and silver feathers were flying all around the car, raining slowly down, sparkling like fireflies. Time seemed suspended for a moment as I gazed at the lights, and then bam! I was back in the right lane, traveling down the road as if nothing had happened. The silver feathers were gone, the screens were gone, and I was still going 85 miles per hour. I was sure I must have at least bumped a deer. I had been so close, but I hadn't felt anything or heard a sound. I looked in my rearview mirror, but I couldn't see the deer. I could see the headlights of the cars and trucks behind me, and wondered if they'd seen my taillights fishtail and hoped they had. I figured it might make them slow down, as even running over a dead deer that large could cause an accident. I decided I had better stop at the next rest station about 5 miles ahead to check out the car for damage. I was sure I could not have missed that deer. It was my husband's car, and I wanted to prepare him for any bad news about it. I pulled into the parking lot of the rest station and stopped the car directly under one of those big lights. When I got out of the car, I was shaking and almost fell. My knees were like two bendy straws. I pulled myself together and managed to circle the car, looking high and low for any damage, and there was none. It was clear that there couldn't have been any deer. What had that whole surreal experience been about? I'd never experienced anything like it. Was I going insane? I started to cry and leaned on the hood of the car for a moment to collect myself. Just as I did, a sedan screeched up next to me under the light. I glanced at it, then looked again, bouncing up off the hood of my car like I had been pulled with a rope. The car might have once been white, but it looked like it had gone through a blood car wash. It was just covered in gore. A woman flew out of the car, cursing and surveying the mess. "What happened?" I asked, completely horrified. She said she had been passing a truck about 5 miles back and was just about even with the cab when the truck hit a deer that was in his lane. She said the deer just exploded, gore, bones, you name it, flying out like a bomb. She said her car was bumping over parts of the deer, and her car got sloshed with blood, and the road was just slick with blood. She was afraid her car was going to skid out of control. The truck kept going, and she couldn't stop. There were too many people behind her, so she made it to the rest stop to check out the damage. She kept circling her car, cursing, and I asked if I could do anything, but she was already on her phone with someone. I just left. It was so strange. I hadn't been drinking, nor did I do drugs. I'm a night owl, so I wasn't really tired. There was a deer. How had I not hit it? How had I not spun my car completely out of control? What the hell did silver feathers and transparent, pushy blackboards have to do with any of this? And where did they go once I drove away?